With Elad, I want to talk about something slightly different, but I'm sure we can find a connecting theme. And that is what makes a company, an established company that operates for several years and is already, has a market fit, has a full sales motion in place, decide to switch core business platforms like CRM, in this case, from Salesforce to HubSpot. So with that introduction, Elad, please introduce yourself and let's kick in that our little back and forth for the next 20 minutes.
Awesome. Hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Nice to see all the audience on the call as well. Excited to be here. I'm Elad. I'm the CEO of Zeotap. As Idan mentioned, Zeotap is a CDP platform. CDP for those who, thank you. CDPs for those who don't know what they are. It's a customer data platform. It's basically a system that allows companies, usually larger-ish companies, to basically connect all the data sources and all of their data kind of floating around the company into a unique customer 360 views, and then from there connect it to actually their downstream marketing platforms so that they can activate them with ease. It solves problems not necessarily solved by CRMs so much. I would say there is a little bit in the world of maybe SMBs. There's a little bit of overlap between CDPs and CRMs, but in general, it's much more of a data infrastructure solution rather than a functional activation solution, which CRM is much more like that. So that's just a little bit about that. In terms of the company itself is about 100 people strong. It's based mostly in Europe with a strong engineering team in India. Yeah, that's it. That's me in a nutshell.
And the audience
excited to be here.
Excited to have you. Excited about the topic because it's a hot one in the industry. And with that, why don't we start actually by talking about that? I mean, so I already spoiled, right? The bottom line is that Zeotap decided to switch over and has made the switch from Salesforce to HubSpot. But let's take that and let's backtrack for a second and say, okay, what was the state of affairs in terms of the operations when you joined the company, and what's the backdrop for making such a decision? What's the backdrop?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess to give some context about how come we ended up indeed switching from Salesforce to HubSpot with the kind help of Envy, if I can throw a, like a placement, kind of an ad in the middle. Basically, the company was at a phase where it kind of like was on the verge of growth, like in terms of size, going to about maybe 150 to 200, but that kind of stopped. And then the company was in a process of figuring out its right size for itself, right? So like that's kind of like that's how I joined the company. In addition, and I'm saying this kind of like it might sound funny, but the company was very accustomed to buying the Mercedes E-Class, with all the trimmings and everything for all software, and then also sign a 3-year contract for everything.
Well, it's a GmbH.
Exactly. So there was a little bit of a culture of basically buying the most known software out there, ideally the most expensive software out there, and find yourself retrofitting afterwards to the organization. And that's kind of like how I joined the company. Now, I joined the company, and I mean, from my perspective, on a personal basis, I don't love Salesforce. But most importantly, I don't think it's a good match for companies that are not of a certain size. I think there's a certain size in which you can either, and I'm sure HubSpot has their own opinion about whether or not they can also service like mega enterprises or not, and I'm not going to go into that discussion.
Actually not, but
oh well, then if not, then it's easier for me. But for sure, for the SMB, whatever you cut the line on the M part, I find HubSpot to be a much better fit than Salesforce to most companies. It requires no coding, like real no coding, like honestly, like proper no coding, rather than Salesforce, which is like fake no coding, but eventually you actually have to have people who do coding for you. I think from a stack, it's much more modern. I don't think it's like as modern as the most modern CRMs on the planet are, but it's modern enough, I would say, for most of the use cases. And I think the balance between how modern is it and how good is their marketplace in terms of apps and integrations puts it, for me, at the right place for SMBs. Now, that on top of the fact that it's like much cheaper, like significantly cheaper than Salesforce, puts it at a massive advantage from my perspective. And that's when I joined, I was facing, from my perspective, obviously there's always a disruption point, right? So like when you change CRMs, it's a big project. There's a risk. You have disgruntled users. Blah, blah, blah. There's a whole thing you have to go through. But I was quite comfortable to say, over time, this will be a much better fit for what the company actually needs. And I saw, as soon as I joined, I started seeing like how difficult is it to actually operate Salesforce, and how difficult actually is, like everything was just a hurdle, right? So it was just very difficult to do things with the system. So so it was quite obvious to me that we need to switch. So
How did,
yeah, go ahead.
just one example, how, when you say something like that, can you give an example
Well, I
of?
mean, the obvious ones, like you want to build a report, you know, or you want to
Okay.
build like just a basic report, like to figure out something, then you have to ask a dude, somebody, to spend time scoping the report and then building something and then going back to the user and say, is this what you want? And they say, no, instead of like, playing with some filters and putting something on a dashboard and seeing how it looks, and that's it, right? So, I mean, there's probably the obvious example. But also from just ease of use, like, I mean, it was very obvious. I mean, basically what happened, the company had basically Salesforce, and then it had another system on top of it. I don't remember the name. I think it was WeFlow or something like that, which was like kind of like a Salesforce built on something, just to make it usable, to make a long story short, right? So you had to have another layer just to make it, user friendly. And so, for me, that's obviously a good sign to say, well, clearly the system is not so great, right? So, and by the way, a lot of these systems exist out there, right? So in terms of like solutions to make Salesforce work better or work as expected, kind of thing, right? So it's kind of a funny situation.
So you come in and you see that the core system for the business doesn't seem to align with the business side and size and its agility and how fast it should move. And you start to think of okay, what do we do? So what first of all, was there any kind of objection coming in from within the organization to the decision? And second, what were the key parameters? You mentioned cost. Obviously, cost is a big parameter, but was there any other parameter by which helped you made the decision that to switch to HubSpot?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things. First of all, I mean, I'm a bit of a weird example because I joined as a COO and then became a CEO, and so I'm kind of like, I had the relatively easy decision-making power to actually make the switch myself. However, I mean, set aside that, I did actually have a chat with a lot of the power users of the system, right? So whether it's the sales organization, of course, the customer success organization, and the support organizations, to make sure that we are not like killing everybody's favorite baby, to use a weird example now that I think about it. But it was honestly, probably everybody was kind of like relieved. So the support team was
Really?
like, just like, take this Salesforce crap away from me. They were like, they didn't want to see it, right? So they didn't want to hear about it, right? So it's just like anything but Salesforce, right? So the sales team were like, well, we don't like Salesforce at all, but we like this WeFlow thingy. HubSpot has the functionality? And then I showed them the functionality you have in HubSpot. So, and then you're like, okay, then we have what we need. And it's kind of like, okay. By the way, I knew there's going to be a degradation. I mean, it's not, I can tell you now, HubSpot is not as fast. I mean, from a UX UI perspective and from an update perspective, it's not as fast as the most modern tools out there, right? So I mean, a lot of companies, whether it's Adio or even this WeFlow, what they do is they keep a very big cache on the browser so that everything flies very, very fast. So you don't have to worry about speed, right? So, I mean, in HubSpot, there's still this like, you filter and then you need to press save and like this kind of stuff. In Salesforce,
Yeah.
it's worse, but even in HubSpot, it's not like, it's a little bit heavier than what you would want in a super modern productivity tool. So that was just the one hurdle that I have to go through. But then, I mean, once we did the cost analysis, which was like 50-ish, I think 50 or 60% lower, the combination is very obvious, right? So it's just like it's a no-brainer, let's say it this way. And so that's kind of like how we did the decision-making process. Again, this is a process, and for those who want to go through this process, it's a process that you want to think about and you want to do, let's say, quote unquote, carefully, so that you don't end up, angering the entire organization because you've changed their private tool. But it's just something that you need to have enough conviction and good enough reasons to do this. And in many cases, it's quite obvious to find whether it's price or whether it's ease of use, and you just go ahead and do it. I think one thing that I think is very clear to me is that a lot of people are super scared of the migration itself.
Okay.
And Zeotap is a company that existed for 11 years before this, right? So it had a lot of data in its CRM. But honestly, I think it's much more conceptual concerns than actual concerns. I mean, I think people just are scared about this. Of course, look, if you're running a CRM that you need to reach out to millions of, like if you have millions of contacts, like, I'm ignoring that, I'm putting that aside for a moment. But if you're running a B2B CRM, unless it's a very large, like if you're Atlassian, okay, I'm sure you have a very big CRM, but you know what I mean? If you're a growth phase, seed A plus phase, and you have a CRM, you're probably okay to migrate, and there's no major concern, I would say.
Okay. Okay, good. Good. That's a
So
good message.
yeah,
I think change management is the biggest challenge in these projects. And the other, so it's easier when you have like a solid reason for doing that change that
yeah,
everyone agrees on. But the second thing that worked in your favor, I think also, and that's another important takeaway, is that, you were at the top of the chain and it was your call.
yeah.
So to make, and you're the executive sponsor of that, and it didn't come from the other way around, from the bottom. It came
Yeah,
from the
like
top.
yeah, I think if you're like leading a revenue operations or a strategy function or like that kind of stuff, and then you need to convince everybody, it's probably harder. But then the obvious message is, okay, then find the COO or find the C-level and convince the crap out of them until they're really excited about this, and then afterwards they'll be, or they're. I mean, you have to. I think you, in any case, if you do a big change management project in a company, you want to have an executive sponsor for that, right? So even in a 100-people company, you don't want to be in a position where you're trying to fight all the battles by yourself, to make a long story
Yeah,
short.
yeah.
And of
So,
course, I mean, to state the
yeah,
obvious, you need to find a good migration partner. So that usually
really?
helps. Usually helps. Let's say it this
Who did you work with?
way. An unknown company from Israel, no,
No,
no name.
it was. I think it was a challenging but very, very educational experience, and um, it was quite obvious that the shift is required. The change management is a necessary thing in your case, and that it's the right call. So let's talk about that for a second.
Sure.
Um, you're now several months after the switch. When you look at it backwards, I mean, in your perception, and again, I'm putting the obvious cost issue aside. I mean, obviously there were savings
Yeah.
here, significant ones, but what are the main parameters by which you judge this to be a successful project?
Mhm.
And also you can talk about, the negative ones.
Yeah.
And then I'll have a follow-up question.
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, the key thing, again, speaking of change management, did you create a massive harm in the company, right? So, like, do you, like, if you go now to all the users and ask them, hey, like, do you like using this? Are you okay using this versus Salesforce, for example? I wouldn't say, like, do you love using this? Because, many people don't like using CRMs in general. It doesn't matter if it's Salesforce, HubSpot, or anything else. But I would say, like, how is your experience compared to, what you had before? And if most people say it's fine or it's better, then that's a good migration, right? So that's like one way to measure this kind of thing. And on that, by the way, I feel very comfortable that we've done a good job in that sense, because all the users are very comfortable using the system right now. It was honestly, by the way, the ones that I was super concerned about was the sales team, because they're usually more precious than others when it comes to CRMs. They were the least excited, the least interested, and were kind of like, okay, I mean, sure, whatever. And when it was done, and it was fine. Like they really wasn't like so dramatic about the whole situation. Support actually was a little bit more, funnily enough, because they were the one complaining mostly about Salesforce. But it took a bit longer from an implementation perspective to get them to a stable state. And I think they were kind of feeling a little bit on edge, I think, for the first few months. But now I think they're kind of in a good place,
Okay.
in a good place in that sense. And the rest of the organization, is kind of was kind of like, okay, it's like it's kind of it's in a good place right now. It's stable. There's still a few bits and bytes that we need to as we haven't completed since the migration that we kind of need to follow up on. But honestly, it's mostly things like related to the Tableau integration, like things like that are not so much on the HubSpot front itself, but much more on the like the migration of some of the objects into HubSpot, which is on us to kind of deliver, and it was not urgent for us to do, so we didn't do it. And now, actually, recently, we actually introduced a new process in HubSpot that was before in this messy hodgepodge between Jira, spreadsheets, Salesforce, like a mess. This was the product request process, and we've moved the whole thing, a feature request, product request process, and we've moved the whole thing into HubSpot as well. So actually invited the product organization as well, and so actually we're adding more, let's say, volume and centricity, if that's a word, yeah, it's a word, into the HubSpot implementation. So overall, I would say post-migration, I would say we're pretty happy. Organization, I mean, the team has accepted it quite well. There's nothing very dramatic about the whole thing. And in general, I think this is, I think, probably one of my key messages is like, again, there's a lot of drama about migrating CRMs. I always find it to be really overinflated, usually by salespeople of CRMs to scare people off from doing such a thing. If you have a good partner and if you have a good RevOps organization, which we had both, I think, I think I mean,
I have to agree.
you should, yeah, exactly. I was more referring to the RevOps team, but fine, no worries. But you should, I think you should feel quite comfortable. If you don't have a RevOps team, you don't have a migration partner, you want to do it by yourself, by, like downloading, uploading, then I would probably err in the, kind of like move to the, be a bit more careful about that. But again, it also depends on how mature you are as an organization, right? So like this is one of the things, right? If you're just getting started, like if you're a small startup, like 20, 30 people, I mean, really, nothing's going to happen, right? So you move a system, really nothing happens. People just tend to be more
Okay, so
dramatic about it.
just before I head to my next question, we're
Sure.
almost up. A reminder to the people on the call: Elad is not going to stay with us for the panel after the short demo I'm doing afterwards. So if you have any questions, pop them up in the QA. I do have one question for you from the list, Elad, that I wanted to ask.
Shoot.
So we spoke. Let's take a short break for a second from HubSpot Salesforce, because I want to take the opportunity that you're here and you had that perspective of CEO, COO, C-level kind of perspective into the operation and what it means to work in today's business environment, and to ask you about something that we spoke earlier on the session, which is what is your take? What is your own take on the impact that AI has on exactly the roles of the COO, of the revenue operations leader in today's business environment? How do you see it? How do you think of it?
Well, I mean, it's obviously, we all have to say now at any session, any webinar that AI is a meaningful impact on the entire business, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, jokes aside, I think, I mean, from where I'm sitting, AI is a massive opportunity in two aspects. One is, of course, in our product, right? So I mean, I'm stating maybe the obvious, but then when it comes to so I think like our CDP, where like we have a lot of AI, a big AI roadmap to make it better and more exciting. But putting that aside, because I think that wasn't the focus of your question, if you look at productivity of teams, I would just fundamentally tell everybody, like, here's your subscription to X, pick X. I don't know. I mean, you can buy probably everything, or whatever, Gemini or Grok or Open or ChatGPT, etc. And over time, you should expect to see increase in productivity. An increase in productivity eventually over time means either you do more with the same amount of people, or you cut people and you do the same thing. And like that's how I measure it, to be honest, right? So like, right now with my marketing teams, with my sales teams, with my demand generation teams, I have, I mean, not only expectations, but we're aggressively using AI in order to, I mean, we're using tools like Clay, like Growth Machine, and all the derivatives of AI that connect to all these tools in order to do our entire demand generation activities, right? So like from my perspective, AI is a massive multiplier, and that's besides the point of like R&D, right? So I expect, I mean, I spoke to my CTO about this. I expect to see it 15 to 20% improvement in R&D productivity in the next 6 months using things like Cursor and like et cetera, right? So it's just an expectation, and so for me, or I give another example from the world of support. For example, I've told the support team I expect 0 people to write any release notes or support documentation. I expect it to be a combination of Gemini, Guide, or Scribe, like the tools that help you do like the walkthroughs, and the Loom recording with the transcript. That's it. I don't want to see. I basically let go of all of our technical writers, and I said from now on, this is going to be done by AI, because you don't get like a Pulitzer Prize for writing the best support article, and from my perspective, that can be easily done by AI. So to summarize, I have a lot of expectations from AI, and I also asked Chris, who our revenue ops team, to connect, based on your recommendation, to connect HubSpot to Gemini, to start playing around with it a little bit, to see how we can actually query HubSpot outside of HubSpot. So that could be that's another cool use of AI, using the MCP connection. Yeah.
So I see a question from Dina, who was intrigued by your comment about integrating feature requests into HubSpot that you mentioned. So there's a question about how that was done. I'm thinking some property that will then trigger notifications to product.
So we have a very very close relationship between our customer success and account executive team and product, because we are a very enterprise focused company, right? So feature requests are very important. Like they represent something like 40 to 60% of our roadmap as a product organization. So like that's a massive, as you can imagine, that's a massive impact. So what we wanted to do is to have. Now, the real problem that exists in this process is that teams work in different tools, right? So basically, what ends up happening is that the product team works in a Jira or something of that nature, or a product roadmap tool, et cetera, and then the go-to-market teams end up working in a CRM. And so what I've eventually did is I've basically told the product team that from now on, that got them licenses for HubSpot and basically built an entire process of feature request. The feature request itself, just the process itself, is actually not only a field, but there's a whole object inside a company that you can basically flag a feature request. I think we ended up using tickets, actually. I think we used the tickets object on companies, and the ticket actually generates a feature request. And of course, on that specific type of tickets, we've added a lot of custom fields. For example, has it been approved, yes or no? Like a very simple yes, no flag, so that the teams, like all the go-to-market team, can go into a board and see easily, okay, what's been approved, what hasn't been approved, what's the estimated delivery date, like all this kind of stuff, right? So like we've built out a whole process around that. But honestly, the magic of this is to have all the teams collaborating in one environment. Otherwise, because we started with like HubSpot and Jira combined, but then we realized that a lot of the conversations are happening on the chat of the request. And so because you can't really sync chats between Jira and HubSpot, like you can't actually sync the comments, we ended up saying, okay, let's move everybody to one place. So that they can actually collaborate and like ask a question, get an answer, all this kind of stuff. Of course, there's also Slack notifications, email notifications, all that kind of stuff. But we wanted to make sure that they're able to actually communicate, because in many cases, the product, like somebody submits a request, then product has some questions, people give follow-ups, it's still not enough, they go back, so all this back and forth has to be documented as part of the ticket, basically.
Very nice. Elad, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and joining us today. I think it shed a lot of light on an issue that is hidden behind some FUD, some fear, uncertainty, and doubt spread by interested parties. Exactly. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me, Idan. I appreciate it. And thanks.